Left his tears from the Daily Wire. And then a short time later, the Daily Wire did some stuff that was inappropriate, unfortunately. So, no longer with the Daily Wire, as far as a subscriber. I was headed outside, and I don't know why these things hit me once in a while. Maybe it was a show somebody was talking about careers or whatever else, and it hurt. It hit me, the stuff that hurt my career over the years, and I mean, definitely did. But believe it or not, in many ways was intended, but I was hoping they could get over the step. I'm one of those people that, well, how can I say it? I was probably one of the last of the old school mechanics out in the working world ever. And what do I mean? No, not old school as far as, how can I say it? Techniques, style, information. No, I upgraded easily. It wasn't a problem. The only time I had trouble working in with the newer technologies like the SCR systems as such was I'd be the last one sent to school, and sometimes I was not allowed to work on the stuff in the field for a couple of months, and then 6 months later I'd be dropped in on one and then sent to finally service school. Well, fortunately for me, the this is one of the things we get to later that hurt. Also, was I'd done some personal study on the side and looked it all over. So by the time I got to the service school, the only problem we had was how it was taught and how they wrote up the tests. But other than that, yeah, I got through pretty well. In fact, there was a couple of tests where one guy came at me, and another thing that hurt my career but didn't hurt was that he came at me about something that I didn't know, he thought, and it was like, it's not whether I know or not, I have an understanding, move on. And there were two parallel systems that weren't parallel. They actually were conjoined, and I'll describe later. So if you're a manager here and you want to know some of the things that hurts other people's careers as people are coming up through in the shop, and a lot of it has to do with you personally. But at the same time, I'm responsible for. Let me describe. Early on, one of the first jobs out of college I had was Brockport Ford Tractor, and whatever Gib Harrington and the boys there wanted me to do, that was, you kidding? I'm here to learn. Never heard of an air ratchet. Coming out of Bosie's, I'd seen one. Didn't make any sense to me. They were wrecked. Let's just say the education and system in New York State that they're complaining about now is not a current problem. Light industrial equipment repair or ag shop was not something they felt was, that's dirty, we're going to go computers. That was the entire Triple Cities reasoning. They were fools. But you couldn't get it through anybody's head, and neither could our young teacher, who was well versed in tech of the time, and still couldn't get it through anybody's head. Wayne Van Wee, by the way. One of the problems I've had in the past throughout the years with such things is just plain honesty. And when I got hung up on certain things and I went and passed those tests, I found out later that there's some guys that got a bug against my personality because it can be abrasive. Honesty is abrasive. And if you can't accept that as a manager, you're in trouble already before anything begins. And I don't mean just with people like me, but I'm the shop guy that was, how can you say it? I was the razor knife. I was the sandpaper. You know what I mean? When they talk about, you got sand in your craw. Yeah. But there was a reason for that. We'll go to it. But anyway, so when I went to service, somebody that already had a dust was angry. They weren't happy that that occurred. And that's a problem of management directly. Well, where did it come from? Well, it came from, he walked in, he introduced himself as a new Eastern area manager and started talking to us about how things were going to change around here. And three of us that were left in the shop looked at each other because nobody else wanted to be in the shop but the three of us. We were older guys. Well, this idiot was in our age group and he wanted young people. Why? Because they don't talk. And he admitted it later. They don't talk back and they do what they're told. No, they didn't. Three came through that shop later and all of them left but one or two. One came back later, but that was after all the jerks were gone, different management. And even when another one came in, I told him he's going to have trouble, and he did, big trouble. So how did he get out of it? He just, whatever, didn't care. His reputation meant nothing to him. He was young, just wanted the job and the money, didn't care. So what happened with mine? Well, mine in particular was this guy came in and started introducing himself and barking how he was going to clean up the shop and clean up how we worked and clean up this, and he was going to make things, how can I say it, efficient again. I said, they've never been efficient here. Yes, they will be, and that was how he started. He said, so now that we've talked about all of this, and some of the other guys made comments too, and they got barked at. So we just backed off. And then he says, all right, I'm going to ask you guys one thing. What's the worst problem you actually have here at this shop? We'd already covered tools. And he's like, well, just don't go there. What else is it? And I said, well, we're like 75% rental fleet. Our biggest problem is there's no standardization throughout the company. A machine might come in with 2, 3, 4, 5 different couplers. I said, the problem we have now is rental is up in Syracuse. We can't tell her anything. So she sends a machine here and wants it back out in an hour, hour and a half. She says, yes, that's exactly the standard. I said, that's not good because a lot of the machines don't have the same accessories on them. So just yesterday, we had a machine come in with an excavator with no auxiliary hydraulics, and it was supposed to go out with an implement hanging off the end that needed auxiliary hydraulics. That's what I'm talking about in particular. But I said in specific what I'm talking about, even those that do have auxiliary hydraulics do not have standardized couplings on them. What do you mean by that? Well, he got all of a sudden offended. And I said, what do you mean? We're 75% rental. It affects us more than anybody else. I said, we need couplers on there or standard open fittings, whatever they are, it doesn't matter. Number 6, say a PC 200 series, all going to have 16 size JIC on the end, or ORB or O-face. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that they're standard throughout the PC 200 line, from the 210 to the 290. And I said in the next one, the 300 series. There's actually only 1 or 2 300 series anyway. But I said the 360, that one's supposed to have 16 go up to 20s or 24s, or put one side 16 and the other side 20, the other one 20 and the other one 24, or 16 and 20, whatever they're supposed to have. If they want couplers on them, put the big Mondo things on there, have everything all the way up to from the 170 on up. As long as we know what's on there or what's supposed to be on there. And he started going into a tirade. I mean, broke me off and went into a tirade. Everything changes and everything this, and when they go in the field and when they do this, and we need flexibility. Whoa, 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 whoa. I know all that. Slow down, calm down. I'm just saying, you asked what our worst problem here in the shop is. That's it. We need to standardize this. Machine comes back off rent. It goes back to standard. We know this. We understand it. There's times we take the valves off the side and hook direct up above. We know this. Sometimes the customer does this. That's fine. What are we putting it back to when it comes off rent? Or if you want to wait until the rent begins, we do the repairs then. But whatever, just some standardization. The coupler on the end of them. Sometimes we run into the fact there are 2, 3, 4, 5 different couplers that require different buckets. We've got multi-pin. I said, yeah, but not the entire fleet. That's what I'm talking about. They don't have multi-pin couplers on there. And sometimes there's a bucket from a completely different series they're trying to latch on there. And maybe from another company that would work if we had one of those multi-pin couplers on each of these with the auxiliary hydraulics. That's our biggest problem. He asked, I'm just telling you. And he flew out again. I'm never going to, don't you ever ask a question. And he went off. I said, all right. He said, so, anything else? And he looked at me and I said, nope. Looked him square in the face, and I said, after that tirade, you'll never have to worry about any suggestion from me ever in the rest of the history here, yours or mine. I'm done. No, wait a minute! And I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you can't talk to me like an adult and carry on a conversation like an adult, this conversation, as well as any other, is over. You give me your information, I'll do what I need to do, and that's how it'll go. Now, just a minute here. I said, yes, you were here before for what, 10 years, left for 10 years, and now you're coming back and trying to establish yourself. I got that. But if you're going to come in here like the hubs of hell, we're the most efficient shop in the system. We have the most rental of any other shop in the system, numbers and percentages, and you're going to sit here and argue and scream at us. And I think there's a problem there, and it's not us. I said, but whatever you want us to do, that's what we'll do. There's no skin off our nose. You talked about being efficient. And he launched into another 5 minute tirade going on about everything in the shop that was wrong. He couldn't stop himself. He was on a jag, and we were supposed to listen. So you say, you did the wrong thing for your career. Did I? One of the things about being the shop firebrand is some of that stuff ended up back to the Crystal Palace, the main branch. And at the Crystal Palace, some of those things were starting to be implemented after that. But when he came back, he actually barked one time that, don't you guys think that just because you made the suggestion it happened? The three of us looked at each other, laughed, and kept right on going. We knew it happened because wasn't the only one that made the suggestion. Later on, he went to the other two guys individually, and he said, well, I don't know what to tell you. He told you the worst problems, and you chewed him out, so I don't know how to help you. And he got even more, and this is a problem with management with an ego and full narcissism. That not one or the other, both. He yelled at both of them, saying that he's toxic to you. And they said, no, we're adults here. We're all in a similar age group. We've got our own personalities. He told you what it was. You chewed him out, and there's not much else we can tell you. He was furious when he left. Yeah, that hurt my career. Didn't care. See, my career is I was the type of person that when I'm out in the field, management is scared what I might say because I might tell the customer the truth. And what I didn't realize was, at that time, in fact, I hadn't realized it for many years, thinking that it was just something that certain companies do now and then. They tell the customer a story, send the guy out. Well, for me, there's a lot of them that didn't tell the customer anything. Just we'll send a tech out, he'll take a look at what you got. Well, yeah, but she's got to know. Yep, I'll write it down here, and he'll make decisions from there. And that turned out pretty good most of the time. Every once in a while it'd come back, and usually that same Eastern area manager would bark in the manager or service writer's ear. Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he do something else? Why didn't he? And they'd have to pick the phone up and say, because they couldn't get the dog off that bone from his first visit. And I'd come into you got all kinds of questions for me. And I looked at him and say, oh, Joy, you got a phone call and now you're going to run your mouth? You know better than that. You're insubordinate, mister. Maybe I am. You going to fire me and take over my job? Go ahead. Then you can write up. Because I won't write it up and tell you what it is when the separation comes. Oh. You got to be hard about everything. And I sat there and looked at him and said, you shut your mouth off, and I gave it to you equally. So we're not here to be pals, partners, or anything else, but we're not here to be enemies either. Now, what's his problem? And he started describing it. And I said, well, that's funny. What do you mean? You two can't read? What are you talking about? I was in the field, typed up the work order, sent it in. I had a connection. You didn't read the work orders? No, wait a minute. I said, no, go ask your buddy if he can read, because it was right there. Well, I want an answer from you. Well, that was how it went. I'm just one of those guys that, no. Why? I know my job. I wrote it up. Go take a look. I'm not going to sit here and play two-face games. In management, there's an ego problem that seems to be consistent in more than three. I'll just cut it back quite a few and say that 3/4 of the guys out there in management, and I say guys in a general sense, they have an ego and a fear because of the company up above. They took on responsibility, and they don't want to be responsible for it. And it comes up with the attitude of, don't you do anything that'll get me in trouble. Well, that's a problem because I'm going out to fix a machine that's going to cause questions anyway. Because it'll be $250,000 to a $500,000 machine usually that we were working on. Of course there's going to be some questions here and there. But the interesting thing is, the guy like me going out there, and two of the other guys that learned it as well, when they went out in the field, they talked to the customer because they'd been with me the same way. They talked to them like the customer was an adult, it was his machine, and he made the final decisions. The company wanted to make the final decisions in this one case, and in many other cases. You don't tell the customer. I said, great. I have no phone service. I can't talk to anybody else. The customer's right there. And I'm supposed to tell him, you're going to decide how his machine's being. Well, no, but several cases I finally said, you know what? They get in trouble when you and I make a decision. Call back to the shop and talk to the bosses there and let them know how you want it done. Well, what do you recommend? Sometimes I'd write it up and hand them the recommendation. And some of the guys, I'd write it up on my work order, they'd copy it, and they'd call in and say, this is what we want done. What do you mean? You talk to him? Of course we talk to him. He's the one repairing the machine that's the expert. And the other guys did that as well. And the thing that came out of that the egotist never got was that if the customer made that decision and the repair was done the way the customer wanted, then when things went wrong, the customer didn't question it very often. There was always those that wanted to take advantage. But when you're the lightning rod for that, that hurts your career. Everything with you is a fight. And I said, well, you come at me like that? Yes, it is. I'm the technician with the most hours, the most time, the most experience, and unfortunately, the most tools. They had a list up there for me that what made it worse than anything else was, and this is at Anderson Equipment, I'll make no bones about it, and Endicott. And they started posting up their list of our training. And the one guy, they picked on him and said, you used to have the most training. He says, yep, and I got out of it. I'm in the chair. Every once in a while, they tell him to go, nope, I don't want to know nothing. He says, I don't know what you know, but when you go out and apply what you know, and you talk to the customer so he knows, then you write up a work order and bring of what you know and what you did. And when you come back here, then I get to read the work order is submitted, and then I get to read what you know and what you did. That way, when I read it, then I know what you know, and I know what you did. Until then, I don't want to know. And there was some truth to that he accepted for quite a while until people up above him said, you've got to clamp down on them and get these things efficient. But there was no specifics. It was always more. We were the most efficient and the highest dollar turning shop per man in the system. And one manager that came in temporarily, only for like a year and a half, 2 years, and then he left and went back to FEMA because it was easier to deal with the paperwork, give you any idea. And he sat there and says, we have the best shop in the system, and I brag about you guys all the time, not just one of you, all of you. He says, because the unique thing is people call back here for different information to each one of the three of you. And he says, I've never seen that before. And he says, the same customer will call once for Kevin, call another time for you, and call another time for Bill, because they know your expertise. And he says, that is amazing to me. But he says, your company is too top heavy. I'm leaving. You lost 2 excellent managers over that. Why? Ego up the line. The same ego I ran into. And because he carried that ego with him, then he went through the managers and drove them out. You've got to get on him more. And the guy says, for what? We've got to get on the other guy to be more tech. And he says, why? The customers love each of them for what they are. I don't know what you're trying to do here because our numbers are excellent. That's not the point. Chargeable man hours wasn't the point. We never understood that. But I've seen that in other shops as well because egos get involved in the management and they come down. Problem with guys like me is we don't have time for it. That hurts our career. If I sat back like a fool and just said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, then I'm, how can I say it? I don't even know how to say it because I just can't do it. Disingenuous. That's the word. I'm disingenuous, but I'm smiling and nodding, and that makes him feel good. To give an idea how bad it can get sometimes, and this isn't just one shop, but this one shop, Kevin wasn't requested, Seth was. Kevin's not tech, Seth is. Kevin can do tech. Kevin just isn't tech. We're training him, and Kevin does a good job, and the customers love him. But he's not tech, so I sent Seth out. Well, I don't know why you do that. I don't trust him. He says, you know what? The customers do, the manager said. Johnny Ross, you out there? Thank you. Well, Jeff Cole, too. Thank you. And he says, well, yeah, but, and he says, look, if the customer wants him, I'm sending him if I can. Why not? Make the customer happy. What do he want? The customers trust these men for what they are. He couldn't grasp a hold of that because it wasn't power, it wasn't authority, it wasn't driven. I don't know why, but if you were an expert at something, pulled you off of that and put you on something else. Why? Because he's in control. And people like us, when we get into the age group, which I said being old time mechanic, that's key. You say, well, you're set in your ways. You didn't. Partially, yes. There were certain things that I was just better at. But then again, they pulled me back in the shop to work on a little gas tamper because the gas tamp, jumping jack or whatever, had been sitting on the shelf for 6 months to a year and had to run. Well, who was the guy that knew how to fix it the easiest, the mostest, and the quickest? That was me. So I had both ends, boat anchor and tech. Kevin loved services. Always loved services. Because nobody's there, nobody wants to know. Kevin knows what he needed. He could write down a list, and he's going out there and performing that service as it needs to be done. And nobody can tell him anything different because the chart's there. And he says the other part that helped was they were always angry at me. He says, especially when you're right. So what hurt my career? Talking back. Years ago, James McFadden Jr., McFadden and Sons up there, complained. He says, I'd hire you in a heartbeat, but you talk back. And the former friend up there that was working for McFadden while I was there just on a temporary basis helping him with an auction, he sat there and said, well, yeah, Jimmy, he knows what he's talking about and he doesn't want to get jerked around. Like you jerked me around. Jimmy would ask a question, and because he had 1,000 things on his mind, I'd offer alternatives and say, okay, you wanted it over here before. You changed your mind, correct? No. Why would I move it from there? Kenny, because you just told him to. What? You got an auction that's going to have thousands of pieces. We expected that. We just didn't expect the... He just said, well, I tell you what to do and you just go do it. And Kenny says, no, I don't. He says, I never do what you want. You just accept it in the end. So he's the new guy. He's trying to work with you. And it aggravated him because he had to think. So I'm just that guy that, well, just being sure what you want here. So we do this once, not 3 times. The efficiency side. But sometimes that wasn't good. And in an auction, that was the funny part. You'd ask that the such and such is here, and you'd see it because I'm out there. Why are you countermanding me? No, just offering a suggestion because this stuff is here. Do you want it with that? Well, that would make sense. No, put it up in the other end of the yard. Well, later on, I'd go up the other end of the yard and bring it back. I said, okay, what was that for? He says, because you questioned me. Got paid the same, so I did it. But it was frustrating being a self-unemployed guy that was just, hey, can you come up and help me with this? Okay. Those are the things that actually hurt people's career. But think about it for a second. Should it hurt someone's career? Because the other part of it is, if I have to play with your ego all the time, what are we getting done? Is it work? Is it planning? Is it scheduling? Is it repair procedures? Any of it? Troubleshooting? Repair? No. Well, then why do you argue with the managers all the time? Well, because they'll turn around and bark at us for efficiency. So talk about it in the first place. And to give an idea of what happened one time, one person they hired who was a super egomaniac of a woman and literally imbalanced hormones. So she was unhinged every day. I mean, we're talking unhinged. She got mad at somebody and literally flashed her boobs at people. Started doing that, as well as swearing at customers and people on the phone, writing nasty comments and notes and gossip all over. It was bad. And I came into the shop one day, and she sat there and says, "Boy, Bill really loves you." And I said, "Yeah, right." And she says, "No, I'm serious." So why? Well, something went wrong, and he sent you out there. And he says, "Well, aren't you going to tell him what you want done?" Right? She says, "No, I leave him alone because I don't have to worry about it. He'll take care of the whole deal. He'll take care of the scheduling, the procedure, and all of it." And says when it's done, he writes it up and hands it to me, and it's all over. And if I call the customer by what's on the work order, there's no question what was done because it's on the work order, and the customer understands it. He says, as much as I hate the guy, that's what I want. But people with an ego don't like people on the road. Every branch in all of Anderson and any other company I've worked for all had the exact same problem. It was an ego with the road guys. All of them. Anybody in management, specifically service writers. If you were on the road and something didn't go the way they wanted, well, I asked several of them, why wasn't it written on the work order prior? Because we assumed you knew. Knew what? Guess what? My crystal ball went with the ex-wife. The batteries were dead anyway. She fried them. If you don't write it down, I guarantee you I will do something different. And if I know you want something a particular way, but we haven't discussed it, if it doesn't get in the way of anything else and harm the job, I will specifically go out of my way to do it the other way, just to tick you off because you couldn't sit down, talk, and communicate like an adult. Well, you shouldn't. Why not? Sure, it hurt my career. Sure, I knew it was going to hurt my career. And I was usually dealing with young little snot-headed guys, and often the same age as I was. But at the same time, it's like, why put me in that position? Start yelling and screaming for something that's childish. Act like an adult. Why didn't you do this? I don't know. Didn't know you wanted to do that. That's not the answer I want. Well, it's the answer you're going to get to start. Why didn't you say something in the first place? That's just standard elementary human engineering, human discussion, communication, working for the customer, working for the job, working for the company. People don't do things, especially men, just don't do things automatically very often. And when they do, they may go up the ladder, but the problem is when they go up the ladder, it's another egotist. And it will continue throughout the years. You say, well, people like you go out and make decisions on your own. Yes. I was a road serviceman. That was my job. Find out what the machine needed, find out what the customer wanted, try and put the two together, and then come up with a plan of action when we go back for what was needed. It wasn't hard in my book, but in management's position, when they're sitting there waiting for the stuff to come back and in fear already because they know up above them something's going to happen, yeah, it's not going to go well, and it never did. I know one of them, they egotistically double-checked my findings. And they did it the wrong way, and I sat there when I got back and said, what do you mean no pump? And it's just, there's no pump. It didn't need it. You were wrong. No, I was not wrong. That needs a pump. Well, we went through it, and I said, did you even read the, I was screaming this almost again. Did you even read the work order, or do you have a problem reading? There you went right over the top of everybody else, right to the Eastern Area Manager standing right there telling me it didn't need a pump. It's great. Were you in the seat? No. Did you pull the book out? Yeah, but no. Did you read the work order under the conditions that it failed? So, because one pump can take you through the entire process except two places. And in fact, one of them it can even do well. There was only one particular position that it failed. Seriously. And they said, and you couldn't cover that. I said, and it was the main function of the machine. But all right, pump's fine. We'll send it back. Well, no, wait a minute. You have to. The truck's on the way. This is no lie. The truck's on the way, right? Yeah. Then no, you're on your own. It's on you. I wrote it up. It's there in the work order. You failed to follow through. You just think you're right all the time. No, but I know I'm right this time. Got the call, got sent out on the job, and I sat there in the customer's office for almost an hour. Well, what am I supposed to do? And we came up with another plan. You told me. I said, yeah, I know. And he countermanded. Yeah. And I called him and told him I want a pump. I want a pump, period. Whether I need it or not, I want a pump. I want the system gone through. I need it right. Yep. What'd you write on the work order? The same. What'd you tell them? The same. They decided you didn't need the pump. I'm your worst nightmare under those circumstances. Why? Because I'm old school. I know what's going on. I know what was wrong with the system. I know what was happening with it. It's a double pump system, and one pump was failing. It had enough to drive a track at almost normal speed. But it was also causing trouble when they were climbing up on a pile. So one pump I knew was failing, and under one particular function, it failed miserably. It failed so bad that the function would start, and it'd sit there and flop until the pump caught up with it at full throttle. Because it was a cylinder that needed 60 gallons to fill it. And trying to describe it to these idiots was just beyond the pale. The machine went back, and I was there, and later on the guy came out and says, well, you don't understand. I was on the phone with him 10 minutes yelling in my ear. And you'll forgive me again? At the time I was in my 50s, I turned and looked at the jackass and said, and I bit my tongue hard, and I said, "Aw, yeah, I had to listen to it. Really? For 10 minutes? Wow, that must have been special. You sent me out for an hour in the guy's office with his employees around and customers coming in and out. That you failed, and I had to take the heat for it. So please, 10 minutes, go find somebody else." "Well, no, he wants Mark Schneider." I said, "Good." "What do you mean, good?" "Well, how did he even know Mark?" I said, "Mark's been there before." And I told him, if you weren't going to listen to me when I told you, wrote it up, and he requested the pump and you still wouldn't give it to him, call Schneider and he can come down. He can look at it. He can condemn the pump, and then they can put a new pump in there on site. Well, that's what he demanded. That's what he wanted in the first place. And I told him, go for it. "Why didn't you want the job?" I said, "Because you wouldn't listen." I said, "Maybe you'll listen to him." Old school. Did that hurt my career? I was already shot. And that's the other point, too, in the management. When you get somebody that's a good mechanic, good technician, good serviceman, let them do their job. And look, you don't have to like them. But at the same time, did my career hurt? Not that much more. And that's why it continues, because it's not hurting anymore. From day one, he wouldn't let it go. So after a while, it just got so bad they hired somebody else back that was even dumber, and came out and started arguing again. And I had to ask him the same question I asked other people. I said, "You're seriously standing here arguing? Before we even start, you're arguing, troubleshooting, and repair with me." "I've got to have this right," he says, as his usual, right in my face. And I sat there and looked at him. "You've been cutting 2x4s for 10 years, and you're going to argue supplemental catalyst reduction systems with me, who has been there, who's done the repairs, who's been in the computers and went to the service schools on this, and you're going to argue?" So that's just beautiful. "Well, you screwed this up." "No, I followed the troubleshooting." "Well, the machine went bad 5 minutes after he got there." I said, "No, the machine was bad. It just hadn't finished. When it got through to its runtime that was allowed when it didn't operate properly." "Well, he only had a few minutes left." "Yes, that's right." "Well, then why?" "Because he ran it before with a warning. The warning is 45 minutes. The troubleshooting is 30. You got to troubleshoot it the other way." "How do you do that?" "What do you mean?" So how do you do that? I have 45 minutes of runtime total. He took 5 here, and he had 5 at the end, and I had 30 minutes in between. How do I do it in 5 minutes? "You did something wrong." "Did you read the book?" "No." "Then leave me alone and go read the book, because it's obvious you don't know what you're talking about." Does that hurt your career? It can. But you need to be honest with your managers. If you're not honest with your managers, you run into trouble like they did with this one. They pulled me off the job, sent me on the road, and guess what they did? They ordered another unit. Another unit came in. The depth sensor in the tank went bad. It had to function properly, and then they had to run through an entire depth efficiency cycle to be sure it was working. And they couldn't make it work because the next one came through was also bad. Brand new part. Brand new. How do we know? The first one had a particular code. There was a malfunction. Pulled it out and put another one in. There was a different malfunction. And each time you pulled the plug, there was another malfunction that would pop up, fault code. So you had 3 separate fault codes on 2 units. Fault codes for unplugged, fault code for one failure, fault code for another failure. And while I was talking with the mechanic that was going through all of this, I looked at him and said, "You got another bad sensor?" He says, "Yeah, tell him that." So why? He says, "It took me almost a week to test the first one the first time to prove that it was bad, and the computer said it was bad. The second one comes through and tests bad, and it took almost another week to do that, so the customer was without his machine for 2 weeks." Why? Because they were angry at old school. We've got to prove it. The computer, it's right here, tells what's going on, tells you what's wrong, tells you which part of the unit is failed. Because in the SCR unit, there is level, and there is heater, and there is quality. 3 parts to the unit. And quality failed. Quality failed on a lot of units in a lot of companies. Problem with Deere, had a problem with Case, a problem with Komatsu to some extent. It wasn't that hard. But those are the things that hurt people's careers. When you're talking and arguing with somebody, trying to get it across, and they get angry because he doesn't understand. Now, I said at one time to one that was, I said, this is getting difficult. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, maybe you ought to rethink how you guys manage this company. He said, why? I said, when I get done with this job, I have 5 service goals with every job. What do you mean by that? So somebody's angry before I go out. Do this with the customer because they're afraid of you and your mouth, and you're afraid of the next guy up. So the company already has a problem internally all the way down. So the technicians are having trouble out in the field, and I know this because sometimes I cross over with other branches and go to service schools and hear it. So service school first before I go out on the road, what we're looking for, because people are all of a sudden antsy. When I get out there, I have to have a service school, my own personal. I go through it and then describe to the customer what's going on. When I get done with the customer, I come back here and have to describe to the other guy, whoever happens to be here that asked for it. Then when I go for parts, I have to have another service school there because they're petrified. If they get the wrong part, who's going to get the blame? And then when you get through, I have to explain it to you when you get here. And then when I go back out, because everybody's forgotten and doesn't know how to read, I have to have the 5th service school. And when I'm done, sometimes there's a 6th service school where I have to describe what was done, how it was done, and when I get done, how I knew that it was the results were there. The conclusion, confirm. And it can all be as simple as steps are written up on the work order, and every time it added up to the same thing. I was frustrated with people that refused to put an effort in and refused to read work orders. They wanted to be spoon-fed. Because it's, I don't know, paranoia. One thing that brought it out, that there's another thing that's a problem, is one idiot said at one time in one place at William Tom Forklift. A guy named Will Oskerlease looked me square in the face and he says, I called your former employer and I see a problem there. I said, what do you mean? You're talking several employers ago now. Because I was new, just got out of college. I took a job that drought hit and he was laying people off. Sales were starting to dry up. Even though they were still fairly good, he didn't have enough to handle all of us. 2 salesmen went before I did. Don't think they didn't take a burn on that. One of them sat there and he was a little hard on me. I said, well, dude, I'm sorry, but I'm not the one who makes those. He says, yeah, I know. It's not your fault. But it hurt, and I'm sure it did. It would have hurt me too. And we got along fine. Both of them. They were nice guys, but they were decent salesmen, but they weren't born to be salesmen kind of thing. They became salesmen. And they enjoyed it. And they were good with people in general. So there, when things dried up in a drought, then there was a problem there. But other than that, any question I had, anything I asked, I'm going to go for the next job, which was at a Massey Ferguson dealer and going real well until I ran into somebody with an ego that would tell the customer anything, claim himself a Christian, and then it would come back that we did something different in a shop at his behest. And in the end result, I'd get the blame for what was done wrong. So I was a little touchy by the time I left there. Then I got to a lawn and garden outfit that did well, but I didn't realize he was already tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And by the time I got there, it didn't matter how well I did. And even there, we had it out one night because he was done abusing his wife and came out and took off after me. And I was just a little kid, 22 years old. But I knew more about welding than he did. And he took a welder and thought it was the same thing as your defibrillator that he was working with in the ambulance. And said, no. So I said, look, I don't even like the kid. And the kid was standing there. I said, he's not a very good mechanic at all. I said, I get that all the time, but at the same time, he's a good welder. So if anybody here said that he knows what he's doing and backs him up, wouldn't it be me that you would listen to? You can't let your egos and anxiety get in the way of everybody else in the business. Because of that, he went out of business. Somebody schmoozed him. So, doesn't do well for career. The other guy did well for his career, but not for the business. Put him out. Big time. Bankruptcy. Barely kept his house. They had to do some wrangling for that, and he ended up okay in the end result. But where was I? Out in the street. For doing something he had never been done in that business owner's life. He turned 40 something and he sat there heading for 50, and he looked at me and says, I just saw something I've never seen in my entire life. And he says, what's that? He says, my shop made money because you were out here. He says, I didn't have time to come out and check on everything. So I just let you do it, and I charged the bill to him, and all I told the customers was, he's conscientious and you have a warranty. If you have a problem, call back. We'll take care of it. He says, that's all I could do. I didn't have time to monkey around. He says, this shop made money. I've never seen a shop make money in my life. Part of it was we didn't have to pay for a lot of service goals. Probably 4. But still, that was something that went on for years, and I had the same attitude at 22 as I do now. The only difference is now I have what they call gravitas. I have the experience, something that, hey, you should listen. And if you don't listen, can't help you. You say, well, that's attitude. Well, to a point, yes. But what do you do if you're not listening? I'm going to stop. I'm not going to waste my time talking to you. You aren't listening. More than once, I've come across people that sat there and were going on, wait a minute, you said this? Yeah, about an hour ago. Oh, that changes everything. Said, it should have an hour ago. Well, you're just poking him. That's not poking. That's pointing out that you have a serious problem with listening and you're so jacked up you're out of control. Well, once a technician or mechanic passes the age of 40 or hits the age of 40, you have a responsibility as a manager to start listening a heck of a lot more. And in certain places like motorcycles, snowmobiles, and other things are a little more visceral, I should say, in some of the cars and performance stuff. If you don't start listening to your technicians by the time they're 25 or 30 and they've been with you a year or two, you're a fool. You're an absolute fool. If you don't start listening to that, no, they're not experts. They're not that. No, but they're working in the shop and they're there to keep their job. They're not there to lose their job. And some of us are there that if you're going to cause me and my shop and my company to lose, and you're going to cost us our jobs here in this branch, I am the last type of old school guy you want to deal with. But we had that enough, and I kept pointing it out on a couple of occasions. And when it got done, it was admitted what the problem was with the shop. But there's nothing we can do because people need to listen. So what was another one? Believe it or not, what were the things that were good about my career? Because I've got 40 minutes in here. And if you've been listening this long, that's great. Nah, heck with it. I'll stop right here because you can understand what's going on with it. I'm going to do another one here of what was good about my career and how it did work out for many people. Many people. But at the same time, if I have to fight and argue, no. Catch you later.